Welcome to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, the podcast where open-source reporting meets expert analysis. This week, Neil Bisson, Director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network and retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, takes you through some of the biggest intelligence and national security stories shaping our world. We begin in London, where Crown prosecutors have taken the unprecedented step of charging a Chinese government official with espionage. This is a case that could reshape how Western governments confront foreign interference under diplomatic cover. In Germany, a former aide to a far-right politician has been jailed for spying on behalf of Beijing, proof that Chinese intelligence operations continue to penetrate Europe's democratic institutions. From there, we move to Poland, where authorities have detained a Ukrainian national suspected of involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. This incident is reigniting questions of accountability, wartime law, and the vulnerability of critical infrastructure. Here at home, Canada's spy watchdog has raised sharp concerns about potential bias in terrorism-linked tax audits by the Canada Revenue Agency, warning that weak or unverified criteria could be disproportionately targeting minority communities. But our main focus this week is on Manchester, where a terrorist attack on a synagogue during Yom Kippur left 2 dead and several injured. We'll take a deeper look at how the attack was carried out, the evolving extremist tactics it revealed, the impact on Jewish communities across the UK, and how MI5 and counter-terror police are responding to prevent further violence. And finally, back in Canada, the federal government has officially designated India's Bishnoi gang as a terrorist organization, a move that carries both domestic and diplomatic consequences. So get ready. There's a lot going on in our world, and Neil is about to fill you in.
Hello and welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, the Director of the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up and a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Each week, I take the latest headlines, making open source articles on national security, intelligence collection, foreign interference, espionage, and terrorism, and provide you with the insights and analysis that take it from information to intelligence. There's been a horrible attack against a Jewish synagogue in the UK, as well as convictions and prosecutions against Chinese spies in Europe. As always, we have a lot to get through, so let's get started. For our first story this week, we're starting with the UK, where Crown prosecutors announced charges against a Chinese government official in connection with an alleged espionage operation targeting Westminster. The case is tied to long-standing concerns about foreign interference inside the UK's parliament and could mark one of the most significant prosecutions of a Chinese intelligence operation on British soil. The official is accused of directing intelligence gathering efforts designed to infiltrate and influence political circles in London. This included recruiting individuals with access to policymakers and attempting to shape parliamentary debate to favor Beijing's strategic interests. For UK authorities, the case represents more than just a breach of national security. It underscores the persistent threat posed by Chinese intelligence agencies operating through political and diplomatic channels. From an intelligence perspective, this prosecution is a critical development. The UK has long warned about the dangers of foreign influence campaigns, but direct charges against a serving foreign official elevate the issue to a new level. It signals a willingness to expose and disrupt state-backed espionage even when it risks serious diplomatic fallout. China has repeatedly been accused of interfering in Western democracies, including attempts to pressure diaspora communities, exert economic leverage, and cultivate political proxies. In the UK, MI5 has previously issued public alerts about suspected Chinese agents seeking to influence members of parliament. Similar warnings have emerged in Australia, Canada, and the United States, all Five Eyes partners confronting variations of the same challenge. By pursuing charges in open court, Britain is making a statement. Espionage conducted under the cover of diplomacy will not be tolerated. This case also builds on a broader pattern of allied nations exposing Chinese intelligence activity, from industrial espionage to cyber intrusions against government and critical infrastructure. Legal and security analysts note that the decision to prosecute is both bold and risky. It will test the UK's ability to balance transparency with protecting sensitive sources and methods. Intelligence veterans stress that deterrence is only effective if backed by visible consequences. And this case is designed to deliver exactly that. This is a landmark prosecution that could set the tone for both Western governments and how they handle state-sponsored espionage moving forward. If successful, it will serve as a precedent that intelligence officers acting under diplomatic cover can and will be held accountable. For the UK and its Five Eyes partners, the message is clear. Foreign interference in democratic institutions will be confronted head-on. We head to Germany for our next story, where a former aide to a senior far-right politician, has been sentenced to nearly 5 years in prison for espionage on behalf of China. Juan Guo, once an assistant to Maximilian Krah of the Alternative for Germany, or the AfD party, was convicted of passing sensitive information and monitoring dissidents in the case that highlights the growing concern over Chinese intelligence activity across Europe. The Dresden court found that Guo, a German national, had secretly worked with Chinese intelligence since at least 2002. His role involved both political espionage, where he gathered internal European Parliament documents and intelligence on German politics, and diaspora surveillance, targeting Chinese dissidents living in Germany. The dual-track nature of his activities reveals Beijing's broad intelligence objectives to shape European political discourse while suppressing critics abroad. From an intelligence standpoint, the case is deeply troubling because it demonstrates how Chinese operatives successfully penetrated the office of an elected European politician, exploiting the democratic system's openness. It also raises questions about how foreign powers might leverage extremist parties like the AfD to undermine Western institutions from within. The trial comes amid a broader pattern of espionage cases involving China across Europe. German counterintelligence has long warned about Beijing's attempts to infiltrate academia, technology, and politics. In this instance, Guo's role inside the AfD placed him at an intersection of populist politics and foreign intelligence interests, a particularly volatile mix for foreign European stability. The case also underscores how Chinese intelligence agencies often operate by recruiting diaspora members and embedding them in positions of access. Guo allegedly handed over another Chinese national working at the Leipzig airport who supplied sensitive cargo and passenger data. That operation reflects Beijing's interest in logistics and transport infrastructure as much as political espionage. Security analysts argue this trial should serve as a wake-up call for all European states. Allowing aides to parliamentarians to operate unchecked creates vulnerabilities that adversarial states are eager to exploit. Intelligence professionals have also stressed that diaspora monitoring is not an isolated phenomenon. Similar patterns are seen in Canada, Australia, and the United States, where Beijing attempts to silence critics abroad. The conviction of Juan Guo shows that Chinese intelligence operations in Europe are not abstract threats, but concrete operational realities. This case demonstrates how deeply foreign influence can infiltrate democratic systems and reminds us that political staffers and party aides are as much a target as the government officials themselves. For Germany and its European allies, this lesson is clear. Vigilance against espionage must extend into the very fabric of domestic politics. We move on to Poland for our next story, where Polish authorities have arrested a Ukrainian national suspected of involvement in the 2022 sabotage attack of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The suspect, a diving instructor known only as Volodymyr Z, is wanted under German-issued European arrest warrant for planting explosives on the pipelines beneath the Baltic Sea. According to German prosecutors, the suspect allegedly participated in a covert operation using a yacht rented under false identities from Rostock, Germany. The team reportedly dove near the Danish island of Bornholm and planted explosive devices that damaged multiple Nord Stream lines. Poland detained the man near Warsaw and has agreed to hold him while German authorities submit extradition documents. From an intelligence and infrastructure security perspective, the case underscores the serious risk posed by subsea energy networks even after those networks are taken offline. The sabotage was not only symbolic, but also functionally disruptive. By striking undersea pipelines, the attackers targeted critical European energy infrastructure in a way that bypasses conventional defenses. The Nord Stream explosion in September of 2022 severely damaged 3 of the 4 pipelines. While investigations were opened by Germany, Denmark, and Sweden, only the German probe continued to the point of issuing arrest warrants. The Swedish and Danish investigations closed without naming suspects. Meanwhile, tensions have swirled over who had the motive and capability to carry out such an act: Russia, Ukraine, or a third party. The arrest is further complicated by the wartime context. The defense argues that since the pipelines are owned by Russia, state-controlled Gazprom, and by extension tied to Russia's war funding, Ukrainians do not bear criminal liability for disabling them. That argument raises thorny questions about the intersection of warfare, sabotage, and international legal accountability. Security analysts suggest that this arrest could mark a turning point in holding actors accountable for attacks on energy infrastructure, even those carried out in maritime zones. Some observers caution, however, the extradition and trial will be delicate. The state of war, questions of jurisdiction, diplomatic ties between Germany, Poland, and Ukraine all create friction points. The detention of a suspected Nord Stream saboteur in Poland brings renewed attention to the vulnerability of Europe's critical infrastructure. Whether Germany can bring this individual to trial will be a test of extradition mechanisms, wartime legal arguments, and the will of allied states to pursue accountability even when it intersects with ongoing conflict. This is a lesson that Canada needs to learn quickly. With continued emphasis on pipeline projects across Canada, the safety and protection of those completed pipelines from sabotage should be a major consideration of each project before shovels hit the ground. Back to Canada for our next story, where Canada's National Intelligence Oversight Body is sounding the alarm. The Canadian Revenue Agency, or CRA, may be using weak or improperly verified criteria when selecting charities for tax audits tied to alleged terrorism links. The process, the report warns, carries risks of bias, discrimination, and unjust targeting of vulnerable communities. In this latest review, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, or NSIRA, found that the CRA's Review and Analysis Unit uses risk indicators that lack rigorous validation and are not transparently documented. In practice, this means that decisions to audit charities flagged for potential terrorist ties could rest on outdated, unsupported, or opaque intelligence. The lack of methodology and oversight introduces the possibility of discriminatory practices, especially against minority-led or Muslim charities, which have historically been disproportionately scrutinized in Canada under the banner of national security. From an intelligence oversight lens, this is a red flag. When counterterrorism measures are merged with administrative functions like tax audits, the boundary between security and civil liberties must be carefully guarded. The report's critique suggests CRA is operating too close to the boundary without proper guardrails, exposing charities to reputational and financial damage without solid evidence. Accusations of targeted CRA audits are not new in Canada. Civil society groups and affected organizations have long alleged that Muslim charities have been singled out under vague definitions of terrorism-related risk. The latest NSIRA review builds on those concerns by insisting the CRA adopt evidence-based criteria, independent validation, and proper oversight before proceeding with audits that implicate national security. The report also comes at a politically sensitive moment. The public appetite for counterterrorism measures remain high, especially in the wake of global jihadist trends. But watchdogs warn that without clear transparency and due process, security tools may become blunt instruments used disproportionately against marginalized groups. Across the civil liberties and intelligence communities, reactions to the reports are sharp. Many see it as long overdue, a formal acknowledgement from within the system that national security tools can be misapplied. Critics argue that any mechanism combining financial regulation and counterterrorism demands strong checks from parliamentary oversight to judicial review to prevent abuse. NSIRA's findings challenge how Canada balances security and fairness. However, Canadian authorities have long wrestled with the challenge of charities being exploited to funnel money towards terrorism. Several high-profile cases show how Canada's charitable system has been abused. Human Concern International, once headed overseas by Ahmed Khadr, the patriarch of the Khadr family, lost government support after intelligence linked his operations in Pakistan and Afghanistan to al-Qaeda networks. The Islamic Society of North America, Canada, faced sanctions in 2018 after a CRA audit found the funds, over $100,000, were improperly directed and may have supported militant activities abroad. And just recently, Ottawa designated the Samadoun Palestine Prisoner Solidarity Network as a terrorist entity in 2024, citing its role as a sham charity raising money for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. These examples highlight how seemingly legitimate organizations can mask extremist financing and why financial vigilance remains a critical component of counterterrorism in Canada. As Canada continues to confront legitimate threats, the test will be whether its institutions protect both safety and democratic values. We move on to a main story this week. An attacker drove into pedestrians and then stabbed people outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Manchester during Yom Kippur, killing 2 and injuring several others before being shot by police. Authorities are now treating this as an anti-Semitic terrorist incident. The methods used in this attack reveal an increasingly complex threat landscape. By combining a vehicle ramming with a knife assault, the attacker employed a blended tactic that makes defense much more challenging. This rapid shift from remote impact weapon to close-range weapon requires security forces and communities to be prepared for multi-attack modes in quick succession. Complicating matters further, the suspect wore a vest that appeared to contain explosives. Although it turned out to be a fake device, the presence of what looked like a bomb elevated the danger for responders and forced counter-terror teams to treat the situation as if it involved an active explosive. That uncertainty stretched decision-making and response protocols at the scene. Police response was rapid. From the first emergency call to the moment the attacker was neutralized, the timeline was extremely tight. The UK's pre-planned marauding terrorist protocols were activated, demonstrating how critical these standing frameworks are when faced with fast-moving threats. The attack also took place on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, ensuring the maximum symbolic and psychological impact on the community. The effects of the Manchester attack go far beyond the immediate victims. It has heightened fear and trauma in Jewish communities across the UK, many of whom already feel under siege due to a recent rise in anti-Semitic incidents. Synagogues, schools, and cultural centers are now calling for greater protection, enhanced surveillance, and increased resources to ensure safety. The attack also tests public confidence in law enforcement and government's ability to protect vulnerable groups. While political leaders were quick to promise more security and nationwide coordination, the effectiveness of those pledges will be measured in the weeks and months to come. This incident fits into a larger global pattern. Extremist actors have increasingly targeted religious institutions and identity-based spaces, from synagogues and mosques to churches and community centers. Attacking during sacred rituals or high-attendance gatherings is intentional. It maximizes visibility, amplifies fear, and strikes at the heart of the community identity. The Manchester case also challenges assumptions about so-called lone actors. While the actor carried out the immediate violence, authorities detained 2 additional suspects, suggesting that even when actors appear to act alone, there may be logistical or ideological support networks operating behind the scenes. The Manchester Synagogue attack forces a reassessment of how vulnerable public spaces are protected, particularly those tied to religious or minority communities. It demonstrates how extremists exploit identity divisions and sacred occasions for maximum effect. The test now lies with governments, security services, and community leaders to translate words into action, improving intelligence gathering, preparedness, and resilience, while ensuring that communities feel secure enough to continue their religious and cultural life without fear. The attack on the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue was more than an isolated act of violence. It was a sobering reminder of how extremists continue to target religious communities and of the challenges societies face in protecting vulnerable public spaces. Occurring on Yom Kippur, the attack carried both physical and symbolic weight, striking at a community gathered for worship and reflection. The attacker's methods revealed a disturbing escalation in tactics. By combining vehicle ramming with knife assault and wearing what appeared to be an explosive vest, he forced security services to respond to multiple threats at one time. This kind of a hybrid assault is increasingly difficult to counter because it blurs the lines between different modes of violence and creates confusion in the heat of the moment. The fact that he was able to reach synagogue grounds, confront a security guard, and attempt to breach the site highlights just how difficult it is to fully secure what may be considered a soft target. Despite the chaos, both staff and worshippers inside the synagogue reacted swiftly. Doors of the sanctuary were locked, congregants were shielded, and the panic was contained. These actions almost certainly saved lives, underscoring the importance of preparedness drills and clear roles in an emergency, even in a space meant for prayer rather than defense. Police also responded rapidly. From the moment the first call was made to the moment the attacker was neutralized, the timeline was extremely tight. Still, the incident will be scrutinized in detail as part of UK's counter-terrorism after-action reviews, testing doctrines such as Operation Plato, the country's framework for responding to marauding terrorist incidents. The attacker's use of a fake explosive vest added another layer of complexity. Police and bomb technicians were forced to assume the device was real until proven otherwise. That uncertainty delayed some aspects of the response, but also highlighted the evolving nature of terrorist tradecraft. Even the appearance of explosives can magnify panic and complicate countermeasures. The aftermath of the Manchester attack extended well beyond the city itself. Authorities quickly moved to increase police presence around synagogues and Jewish community centers across the United Kingdom. For Jewish communities already reporting a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, the attack reinforces fears that places of worship are increasingly vulnerable. The incident also feeds into a wider European and global pattern. Religious institutions, whether synagogues, mosques, or churches, continue to be symbolic targets for extremists of different ideologies. The attack inevitably left deep scars, both physical and psychological, on those involved. Yet resilience is already visible in the response. Community leaders, interfaith groups, and political figures have expressed solidarity, ensuring that the narrative does not solely belong to the attacker. The symbolism of Yom Kippur as a day of reflection and atonement also amplifies the resilience of this message, that worship will continue and that acts of violence will not silence or intimidate. At the same time, the attack raises broader questions about how societies balance openness and security. Synagogues and other faith institutions are designed to welcome congregates, not to resemble fortresses. But the rise and frequency of extremist attacks is forcing leaders to reconsider security architecture, funding, and training, all while ensuring that communities do not feel isolated or besieged. The Manchester Synagogue incident demonstrates that terrorism today is as much about psychological impact as it is about physical harm. It forces governments, communities, and security services to adapt, not only in terms of rapid response, but also in how resilience is cultivated. Preparedness, solidarity, and careful post-incident messaging are now as central to counterterrorism as intelligence collection and police tactic. For the Jewish community in Manchester, and for other religious communities across the world, the path forward will be defined not just by the scars of this attack, but by the determination to remain visible, resilient, and unafraid. In the wake of the horrific attack in Manchester, MI5 and UK counterterrorism police have shifted into a heightened operational posture. Authorities fear that the synagogue assault may have been inspired by Islamist extremists, possibly amplified by global events and online radicalization, and are acting to prevent any follow-on attacks. Almost immediately after the incident at Heaton Park Synagogue, British intelligence agencies elevated their alert level and deployed additional protective measures around Jewish community sites across the country. The Joint Terrorism Analysis Center, housed within MI5, kept the national threat level at substantial, the third tier out of 5, while leaving open the possibility of raising it depending on what emerges from the investigation. At the same time, forces in London and other major cities reinforced visible patrols around synagogues to reassure communities and deter opportunistic acts of violence. Political leaders pledged high visibility protection in Jewish neighborhoods, reflecting both concern and determination to prevent a repeat of the tragedy. Investigators are focusing on whether the attacker acted alone or had support, and whether online materials or recent global conflicts played a role in his radicalization. This reflects an evolving threat environment where extremist attacks may not be centrally directed, but are instead inspired by events abroad and spread rapidly through digital networks. For MI5, this heightened vigilance fits into a wider pattern. In recent years, the service has repeatedly warned that crisis in the Middle East and elsewhere can shift the volume and shape of threats facing the UK. When such events are exploited by extremists, they create fertile ground for radicalization, especially among individuals already vulnerable to extremist messaging. For security agencies, it highlights the need to adapt quickly, reallocating resources to physical protection, intelligence collection, and community engagement to prevent escalation or copycat incidents. The heightened posture adopted by MI5 and counter-terror police illustrates how a single incident can ripple across the national security landscape. The Manchester Synagogue attack is no longer viewed as an isolated act, but part of a broader set of threat dynamics. Less centrally planned, more ideologically driven, and increasingly tied to global events. The challenge for Britain is to stay one step ahead, ensuring that intelligence, preparedness, and resilience remain robust in the face of shifting risks. For our last story this week, we end in Canada. In a major escalation, Canada's federal government has officially designated the Lawrence Bisnoy gang, a transnational criminal network originally from India, as a terrorist entity. The designation comes amid mounting evidence that the gang has been involved in extortion, targeted violence, and intimidation of diaspora communities across Canada. This move converts what was largely treated as organized crime into a counterterrorism priority. The designation gives Canadian authorities expanded legal powers, including the ability to freeze or seize assets, charge individuals under terrorism statutes, disrupt financing, and broaden surveillance and intelligence sharing. The public safety minister emphasized that, quote, specific communities have been targeted for terror, violence, and intimidation by the Bisnoy gang. Listing this group gives us more powerful and effective tools to confront their crimes, unquote. But this isn't merely a domestic law enforcement maneuver. The designation carries heavy diplomatic and symbolic weight. It intensifies Canada's confrontation with the gang's activities abroad, particularly in India, and reframes Canada's handling of diaspora security as part of a broader transnational counterterrorism posture. The push to label Bisnoy as terrorists has been building for months. Provincial leaders in British Columbia and Alberta publicly urged the federal government to act, citing rising extortion threats against South Asian businesses and claiming that ordinary policing lacked the necessary legal reach. The gang's notoriety is tied to several high-profile violent cases, including the 2023 murder of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia, an event that had already triggered a bitter diplomatic standoff between Canada and India. Canadian authorities have alleged links between the Bisnoy network and assignments originating from Indian agents targeting diaspora critics abroad. Critics caution that the gang lacks a clear political or ideological doctrine. Some warn that lowering the threshold of terrorism designations risks diluting the concept and opening the door to legal overreach. Supporters of the listing argue that it was long overdue. The gang's tactics, murder, extortion, arson, threats, mirror those of terrorist networks in terms of intent, scale, and transnational reach. For diaspora communities, the designation sends a message that attacks on their security will be treated with utmost seriousness. Skeptics raise procedural concerns. They ask whether Canada's terrorism listing framework is robust enough to withstand legal challenge and whether the evidence meets the threshold for terror activity rather than criminal enterprise. Also, they caution that such a designation pressures courts, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic actors to manage its implications carefully. Canada's decision to label the Bisnoy gang as a terrorist entity signals a strategic shift. Diaspora-linked violence will now not only be a matter of crime control, but of counterterrorism. The designation empowers authorities with the tools long reserved for ideological or insurgent actors. But the real test lies ahead, and how those tools are used, how diplomacy with India is affected, and whether Canadian legal safeguards preserve fairness and prevent misuse. That's going to do it for this week. As always, the articles discussed are in the transcript. I want to remind my listeners that the Pillar Society will be hosting a speaker series on the 14th of October at the Shankman Center in Orleans, and tickets are still available. We are fortunate to have a former FBI executive, Laura C. Anderson, to discuss the current state of intelligence in the United States and how Canada and the world will deal with the current U.S. administration from an intelligence sharing perspective. I highly recommend that you get tickets for this event. And who knows, maybe your favorite neighborhood ex-CSIS spy will be there too. Until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That wraps up this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. Thank you for joining us. We began in the United Kingdom, where prosecutors charged a Chinese government official in a landmark espionage case, and in Germany, where a far-right political aide was jailed for spying on behalf of Beijing. We looked at Poland's arrest of a suspect tied to the Nord Stream sabotage, and Canada's intelligence watchdog raising serious concerns about potential bias in terrorism-linked audits by the Canada Revenue Agency. Our main story took us to Manchester, where a terrorist attack on a synagogue during Yom Kippur revealed not only the evolving tactics of extremists, but also the resilience of communities and the challenges faced by security services in protecting places of worship. And finally, we closed in Canada, where the government officially listed India's Bisnoy gang as a terrorist entity, a move with both domestic and diplomatic consequences. Each of these cases shows how espionage, terrorism, and foreign interference are not distant threats. They are active challenges shaping our democracies and security today. Producing this podcast requires significant research, careful analysis, and a focus on turning open source reporting into actionable intelligence. If you value these insights, I encourage you to subscribe to Neil's Substack page, where you'll find extended commentary and deeper dives into the stories shaping our world. Don't forget to subscribe, share the show, and leave a review. It's the best way to grow our community of informed listeners. Until next week. As Neil always reminds us, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.